Hello everyone, and welcome back to LexiMind, the channel where knowledge meets language learning.
That's right. If you're new here, this is the place where we dig deep into amazing books, discuss the big ideas inside them, and at the same time, we teach you real, useful language that you can actually use in your everyday life.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Lucas, and today we have an absolute page-turner for you.
By Emily Bronté's multi-generational classic, Wuthering Heights. And we're going to do it in a kind of unique way. We're anchoring its wild, totally tempestuous plot to the very vocabulary that drives it. Let's be real for a second. If you've ever felt completely lost on those foggy Yorkshire moors while reading this masterpiece, or if you felt like you needed a literal spreadsheet just to keep track of all the complicated family drama, you are absolutely not alone. It's a dense book. But here's the secret to cracking it wide open. By really digging into the specific, incredibly carefully chosen words Brontë uses, we can unlock the absolute heart of this tragedy and actually make sense of all that melodrama. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 6 key phases. First, an outsider on the moors. Then, the foundling and the waif, 2 houses, divided hearts, followed by the architecture of revenge, the second generation, and finally, the uncanny resolution. Section 1, an outsider on the moors. We're kicking things off in the year 1801 with a total stranger stepping into the savage, forbidding world of the Yorkshire moors. To really get Wuthering Heights, we have to start with the man who introduces us to it, and our very first essential word, misanthropist. Now, let's break this down. It comes directly from the Greek words misos, which means hatred, and anthropos, meaning mankind. So literally, someone who actively dislikes humankind and avoids human society. Our narrator, Mr. Lockwood, really fancies himself this brooding, romantic misanthropist. He's actively seeking out this quiet, poetic isolation up in the north of England. But honestly, he is so entirely out of his depth. He thinks he dislikes human society, sure, but he's completely unprepared for the raw, genuinely anti-social savagery of his landlord, Heathcliff. Lockwood is our outsider, and he's this incredibly unreliable lens through which we experience that initial shock of the moors. During his second visit, Lockwood gets trapped by a massive snowstorm and has this terrifying nightmare that introduces our next absolutely crucial word, waif. Now, when we hear waif today, we usually just think of a lost or skinny kid, right? But Brontë is doing something way deeper here. In historical British common law, a waif actually referred to a piece of ownerless property washed up by the sea or an abandoned animal. It signifies something that is entirely untethered from society. Imagine being so stripped of your identity that the law views you as literal washed-up debris. So in Lockwood's dream, when the ghost of Catherine is begging at his window, crying that she's been a waif, wandering the moors for 20 years, she isn't just saying, hey, I'm lost. She is declaring that without Wuthering Heights and without Heathcliff, she was fundamentally erased from the universe. Section 2, the foundling and the waif. To understand exactly how Catherine became that ghostly waif, Lockwood shifts the storytelling over to the housekeeper Nellie Dean, who takes us 30 years into the past. The entire saga really ignites with this one specific concept, a foundling. And we have to be clear, this is deeply distinct from an orphan. An orphan is a child who has lost known parents. But a foundling? A foundling is an infant abandoned by its parents, discovered and cared for by absolute strangers. They are entirely devoid of origin, history, or social standing. So when old Mr. Earnshaw brings home a starving, dark-skinned foundling from the streets of Liverpool, he names him Heathcliff. And notice this, Heathcliff serves as both a first and a last name. Having just one single name effectively erases him from the heavily entrenched, rigid class system of Georgian England. His status as a foundling makes him a total blank slate for old Earnshaw's affection, but also a massive target for immense destructive jealousy. The huge turning point happens when the eldest son, Hindley Earnshaw, reacts to his father's death. He immediately weaponizes our next word against Heathcliff, degradation. Let's look at the roots of that word. To degrade literally means to step down. From the Latin de, meaning down, and gradus, meaning step. It means to forcefully lower someone's rank into the dirt. Hindley enforces the violent degradation of Heathcliff by stripping him of his education, banning him from all social circles, and forcing him into hard manual farm labor. See, Hindley doesn't just want to hurt Heathcliff physically. No, he wants to psychologically and socially erase him, pushing him all the way back down into the very dirt from which the foundling was rescued in the first place. Section 3, 2 houses, divided hearts. This relentless degradation forces a massive divide, eventually pushing Heathcliff and his fierce companion, Catherine, toward a fateful discovery. When Catherine and Heathcliff sneak off to spy on the neighboring Linton family, we hit this stark, almost unbelievable geographical and psychological dichotomy. On one side, you have Wuthering Heights. It's raw, jagged, wild, hostile, and deeply, deeply passionate. Thrushcross Grange, on the other hand, is cultivated, genteel, elegant, and super polite. When Catherine gets bitten by a dog and is taken into the Grange to heal, she undergoes a severe transformation. She becomes violently torn between the primal, savage nature of her home with Heathcliff and the refined, polite, but ultimately kind of superficial society of the Lintons. This leads to Catherine's confession to Nellie, which is easily the absolute emotional climax of the story's first half. She says, "He's more myself than I am. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath. A source of little visible delight, but necessary." Just look at that vocabulary. The eternal rocks beneath. It's this unyielding, almost geological connection. Yet tragically, she fatally chooses to marry Edgar Linton because, in her words, it would degrade her to marry the now lowly Heathcliff. She literally chooses social standing over her own soul. And the great, heart-wrenching tragedy? Heathcliff secretly overhears the part about his degradation, but vanishes into the night before he can hear her declare her eternal love. Section 4. The Architecture of Revenge. Overhearing Catherine's perceived betrayal, Heathcliff vanishes, only to return 3 years later as a wealthy gentleman, entirely bent on vengeance. But before we see the full extent of Heathcliff's revenge, we really need to understand the environment he returns to. It is a world totally ravaged by this word, consumption. Today, we know it as pulmonary tuberculosis. It was a disease so prevalent and so tragically misunderstood in the 19th century that even the Brontë sisters themselves would ultimately succumb to it. But the term consumption is just wonderfully evocative for this novel. It means to waste away, right? To be eaten from the inside out. Literally, this disease claims Hindley's wife, Frances, triggering Hindley's descent into the fatal alcoholism that Heathcliff exploits. But on a deeper, metaphorical level, consumption defines this entire section of the story. The characters are physically and emotionally consumed by their passions, their hatreds, and their crushing grief. This totally toxic environment breeds a masterclass in cruelty. Heathcliff's systematic vengeance isn't just about physical violence. He wants to dismantle his enemies using the very laws of the society that rejected him in the first place. He lends money to the drunken Hindley so he can slowly acquire the Wuthering Heights estate. He marries Edgar's sister, Isabella Linton, solely to spite Edgar and abuse her. He inflicts that exact same degradation on Hindley's son, Hareton, keeping him completely uneducated. And finally, he kidnaps young Cathy Linton and forces her into a marriage with his own dying son. He ruthlessly uses the legal structures of property and marriage to absolutely destroy both the Earnshaw and Linton families. Section 5. The Second Generation. Heathcliff's brutal kidnapping plot thrusts us right into the lives of the children, where this whole cycle of trauma threatens to repeat itself perfectly. If we map out this generational shift, it makes a lot of sense. We start back in 1771 with the foundling Heathcliff's arrival. Then we hit the massive pivot point in 1784. Catherine dies the exact same night her daughter, young Cathy, is born. 12 years later, in 1796, young Cathy discovers Wuthering Heights and begins interacting with the degraded Hareton. And this catches us right up to 1801, which is when our narrator Lockwood first arrived on the moors. When you look at the symmetry between the generations, it is almost frightening. The love triangle of Catherine, Heathcliff, and Edgar in the first generation is perfectly tragically mirrored by Cathy, Hareton, and Linton in the second. We see exactly how Heathcliff weaponizes his frail, terrified son, Linton Heathcliff, to trap the compassionate Cathy Linton. He is literally forcing the second generation to play out the exact painful dynamics of his own past, making sure everyone suffers exactly the way he suffered. But here is where the cycle finally breaks. Unlike the doomed first generation, the combative relationship between young Cathy and the uneducated Hareton eventually softens. And how do they do it? They reconcile through the simple acts of reading together, showing kindness, and sharing genuine affection. Think about the incredible significance of this for a second. Vocabulary and language, the very things that Hindley and Heathcliff used as tools of degradation and isolation, become the exact mechanisms for their healing and redemption. It is this deeply redemptive love, and it's something Heathcliff simply cannot comprehend. Section 6. The Uncanny Resolution. As this new, healthy love blossoms between the younger generation, Heathcliff's iron grip over the two estates suddenly begins to dissolve. Our explainer reaches its haunting conclusion, governed by our final, defining vocabulary word, the uncanny. Now, the uncanny is a really specific psychological concept. It describes something that is familiar, yet profoundly strange and unsettling. In German, the word is unheimlich, which literally translates to unhomely. And this brings the entire narrative completely full circle. This story is fundamentally about a man who was denied a home as a foundling, only to spend his entire life creating an unhomely, deeply haunting environment for everyone else around him. And we see this perfectly illustrated when Heathcliff admits he bribed the sexton to open Catherine's grave. He did this so that when he dies, his burial box can be loosened and their dust can literally, physically mingle. It is grotesque, sure, but it's also the ultimate, uncanny expression of an obsession that completely transcends mortality. Because of this uncanny obsession, his final demise isn't some dramatic, fiery battle. It's actually this bizarre fading away. He suddenly just loses all desire for his meticulously planned revenge. He looks at young Hareton, he sees Catherine's eyes in the boy's face, and all his cruelty just becomes meaningless to him. He becomes entirely consumed by Catherine's ghostly presence, constantly seeing her in every corner of the room. He completely stops eating, he stops sleeping, and finally, he dies. He's found soaking wet by an open window with this strange, fierce, joyful smile frozen on his face. He simply abandons his lifelong vengeance to finally, literally, join the ghost that has haunted him all these years.
Which brings us to the number 3. Lockwood returns at the very end of the novel to find 3 gravestones standing quietly side by side on the moors: Edgar Linton, Catherine, and now Heathcliff. The physical bodies are finally at rest in the earth. And this leaves us with a final, really provocative thought about the lingering spirits of Wuthering Heights. See, the locals swear up and down that they still see Heathcliff and a woman walking the moors in the rain. So I have to ask you, do Catherine and Heathcliff finally sleep peacefully in that quiet earth, as Lockwood suggests at the end of the book? Or is their eternal ghostly haunting of the moors the ultimate, defiant triumph of their wild souls? It's a question that has kept readers utterly captivated for nearly 2 centuries. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the words behind the stories.